Okay, welcome everybody. We are going to get started in just a few moments. So we'll let everybody join, of which I can see a few people already joining in. So thank you for joining us. We are live on LinkedIn as well. So if you're watching us over there on LinkedIn, thank you for joining us there. We'll get started in about 30 seconds or so. So still have time to grab a glass of water or a cup of tea or something like that before we get started. Okay, how are we looking? Everything's looking pretty good. Okay. I can see now we've got a few people inside, so we will get started because we want to be conscious of keeping this within 1 hour. So welcome everybody to part 3 of our NextGen Workforce Series, Future Skills in the Digital Age. This, as I said, is part 3 of our 3-part series. I'll be sharing those links in just a moment. So if you've come along to the other ones, thank you very much for rejoining. So if this is your first one, thank you for the first time for joining us. We've got a very exciting discussion planned for you. Before we do that, I just got 3 very quick housekeeping things to get through. First of all, this webinar is being recorded and it's being live streamed. So if you can't make it to the end of the webinar, you'll be receiving a link to the recording tomorrow, both on LinkedIn and by email. Second of all, there will be some polls throughout the discussion today. We've only got 2 for today, so please participate in those. The more votes, the better, so we get a nice clear picture of how everybody's feeling about the different topics we're going to cover today. We're also going to discuss those as we go along with our panel. And last but not least, there will be time for a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to fire them into your Q&A box. You can see at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. We'll answer those at the end. Unfortunately, if you're joining on LinkedIn, you can't fire them in there, but feel free to drop them on the comment section in the event. We'll try to bring them over here. And as always, if you have any questions that come up afterwards, or if you don't want to ask it live, it's not a problem. You can drop that into our email at hello@devskiller.com. So feel free to fire us an email. I'll put that in the chat box in a moment as well. So now that the introductions and the intro and these quick housekeeping things are out of the way, I might start with the most important introductions, our panelists. I'm going to go left to right on my screen. So Alex, can you kick us off? Please give us a quick few words about yourself, please.
Thank you, Justin. Yeah, I'm Alex Dawson. I'm a learning and organisational development practitioner who's worked across sectors in the UK. I'm currently working in the higher education sector with a focus on research culture. I'm very passionate about immersive and experiential skill development. And away from work, I coach youth football and adult basketball. And those 2 worlds have had a big impact on my thoughts on skill development. That's me.
I didn't know that, and you just hit my 2 favorite spots, so good to know. Anyway, thank you very much for that intro there. Bhavna, can you go next, please? Give us a few words about yourself.
Sure. I'm a learning and development lead at And Digital. I play a real pivotal role in actually driving growth by creating and fostering a learning of, a culture of continuous learning here, and support and in our purpose of closing the digital skills gap. My career started with learning and development a long time ago. It was like global professional services firm, collaborated with a global audience, and I've got experience across sectors like social care consulting, fintech, and so on. I'm really passionate about employee engagement, empowerment, and really professional and personal growth of people. So I'm dedicated to creating those environments within the organization. I'm also a women in tech lead here, and I'm always here to have those tough conversations that women face in workplace and also outside in like everyday world. And outside of this, I'm actually an advocate of animal welfare, and I really enjoy reading a lot about animal behavior. I've got 2 dogs and a cat that I sometimes experiment all these behavior techniques on. Don't go well. They're not the most well-behaved dogs and cats. Still keep exploring. That's a bit about me.
Hopefully I can pick up some tips on the dogs as well, because I've got 2 sitting out in the other room. So let's see if they keep quiet throughout the webinar today. But thank you for the introduction. And last but not least, Jeff, can you give us just a quick intro about yourself, please?
Yeah, no, sure. No worries. So I'm Jeff Wellstead. I'm the CEO and founder of a consultancy called Big Bear Partners. I focus primarily at this stage on the advent of artificial intelligence and its use in HR technologies, as well as people analytics, and really helping us understand what has been basically the most mysterious, yet most expensive and powerful asset that any organization has. and gaining insight into who those individuals are is critical. My career, I'm not going to go through and bore you to tears with it, spans like 35 years. I mean, first half of which I spent in and around New York City with big multinational nightmares like investment banks and consultancies and tech companies and pharma companies and, big giants. Got all the t-shirts, didn't love the HR experience, to be perfectly honest. Wasn't all about people. It was all about the money, as you might understand. And then so I came over here in 2004, 20 years ago, started working with hypergrowth, tech companies. The mantra was, we hate HR, please don't do HR, but do all the things that keep people coming here and staying here and doing amazing work. So that was my remit. And I got to do that over and over again with about 16 different companies since I've been over here. And it's been a load of fun. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and to all of you for those introductions. As I mentioned, this is part 3 of our 3-part series called NextGen Workforce Series. Part 1 was called How Generative AI is Transforming the Digital Workforce Landscape. Part 2, Reskilling and Upskilling Strategies in the Digital Age. So we're kind of building blocks to our final and third chapter of this series, which is Future Skills in the Digital Age. So we're going to be hopefully sharing some insightful tips with you guys today throughout the session. Now, we are going to get started in just a moment, but before we do so, I'm going to launch our first poll for today's webinar. There are going to be 2. So the question here is, it's related to critical skills. So what do you believe is the most critical skill for employees to succeed in the digital age? We have data literacy and analytical thinking, adaptability and continuous learning, problem solving and critical thinking, technical skills like AI coding and automation, collaboration and communication skills, emotional intelligence and leadership skills, and other. And we finally have some votes coming through. That was a little bit slower than usual. So if you are just listening in, or if you've got us on another screen, that's completely fine, but pop back over to Zoom and just cast a vote for us. And we are going to be discussing the outcome of this poll and much more throughout today's discussion. I will leave it for a bit longer because only about a third of you have voted. But as we are conscious of time, I might end the poll now with some interesting results. Speaking of the critical skills for employees to succeed in the digital age, we have 60% for adaptability and continuous learning and 40% for emotional intelligence and leadership skills. So more on the soft skill side, which is very interesting. I hope that we can elaborate on that a little bit further, but we are going to start the discussion today with you, Jeff, talking about generative AI, something that is close to your heart, as we well know. So the question here is, in the context of generative AI and other emerging technologies, how can organizations ensure they're developing the right people strategies to remain competitive?
Yeah, powerful question. And it's multi-layered, obviously, but I'm not going to go into all the layers. But look, I mean, the advent of AI as a tool, not just generative AI, which is sort of the fun thing that all of us play around with and get it to write, poems about hot dogs using Shakespearean sonnet structure and things of that nature, or write songs for us, all those kinds of things. It's, obviously people have played with it at work as well. They're really quite enjoying the leaps, if you will, in terms of co-piloting our creativity and our thinking, and the fact that it just takes away that pain of staring at an empty screen until your forehead bleeds, trying to come up with like just the basics to go get a project started, things of that nature. And it can really accelerate the way that we think about a thing. It's now kind of like rocketing into the next phase, which is you can actually use these things as task agents. You can connect AI to your, business intelligence tools, your ERP tools, whatever you're doing, and basically say to it, please go execute this task. Or if this is true, then just do it automatically, and if, so, and people are experimenting with it on an industrial basis, right, across manufacturing, across, computer modeling, across all sorts of different areas. And it's proving to be really powerful and exciting. So the question then begs, if this is all happening around us and we haven't really kind of wrapped our heads around, the potential use cases of AI in our organization, what can we do very quickly to kind of catch up and kind of embrace a new thing? Now, interestingly, that poll that Justin just threw up on the screen, I would have expected to see a lot of the other choices made around things like problem solving, around data literacy, around statistical and analytical thinking, around these kinds of elements, because what the AI basically will do for us in very short order, and frankly, probably without choice, is take away all the task level, administrative, compliance-oriented, governance-oriented types of tasks, and basically instantaneously leave us going, that's what I spent about 70% of my day doing. And now that's gone. It's just a chatbot, and it's just, it's got all the answers in the world to it. Yes. So then the question then begs, well, what do I do now? How do I think now? How do I actually embrace this new future? The power of the AI tools are that you're instantaneously gifted with a second brain, and a damn good one, really fascinating. And they're getting better by the day. I mean, literally by the day. And so what do you do with yourself? You got to become more strategic in terms of your thinking. You got to think much more holistically around the entirety of your business and what you're in business for. You need to think about then how your function can radically impact the direction of that business, as an example. So you have to embrace these elements around holistic thinking and strategic thinking and how to solve problems. It's a lot easier than it sounds. It's what your brain does every day, but unfortunately you just don't have time to pay attention to it. So to the extent that you can kind of embrace those elements, and we'll talk more about those critical skills, the better off you're going to be in terms of diving deep into this world and allowing AI to really kind of float up your thinking and get you to think very, very differently about your tasks and so forth. And it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more intellectually freeing, and you'll have a brilliant time doing it and feel a lot smarter at the same time. So those are the things, I think, without getting into too many different layers about all this, that I think are here for us now.
Yep, for sure. We were talking about it before we went live. The amount of time it frees up on a day-to-day basis, I was mentioning in the context of my own work, and it's frees up the time to, as you said, focus on this strategic thinking, critical thinking, the things that previously this wasn't enough time to do, basically. So this is most for sure one of the most important things. So thank you very much for that, Jeff. We're going to shift gears a little bit here and move it over to you, Bhavna. You said in your introduction your passion for continuous learning and stuff like this. This question is on the role of continuous learning. So what role does a culture of continuous learning play in closing digital skills gaps within organizations, and how can leaders cultivate this culture effectively?
Yeah, great question. And I think culture, or creating that learning culture, is really core to it all. I almost think it should be embedded as like a core value in the organization, right? It really equips people with like the necessary skills and knowledge to adapt to that ever-evolving landscape that Jeff was just talking about. And it really then ultimately leads to that innovation, productivity, and also that competitive edge that people really need, or organizations need. So we really need to think about like how we bridge that gap, especially in like those digital skills. Think about how we create that culture, so maybe it's actually looking at what this continuous learning provides. How do you keep up with those existing skills relevant, and then bridge that gap between the current skills and then demand of those emerging technologies, which is changing constantly, right? It really fosters that growth mindset, which is really important. So, and that really encourages people to embrace change. So that's why it's important for that learning to be part of the core culture in an organization, keeping up with that pace. So something that's key to engaging learning is also to have opportunities across like your platforms to like share and collaborate. We talk about, and I'll talk more about it, is actually creating that learning ecosystem. How do you have like learning initiatives where you involve like these knowledge sharing platforms? You can actually share best practices with people, and people can learn from each other, because that's how people learn best as well. So in that learning ecosystem, you move away from targeted learning interventions, because where you're targeting problems as they come, to actually creating networks, opportunities like multi-level learning, where people can actually constantly learn and grow, right? So that's really important for how people learn. And then the other key thing is, when you have learning as like a core value, it's not just like a name somewhere, it's not like on the boards, but you're really embedding it. It's for leaders to actually be a role model and showcase that, right? So they need to really showcase their growth mindset by sharing probably their development areas, and even little tactical things like them facilitating sessions or curating content, etc., and create that psychological space for people to say, it's actually okay to talk about growth. Yes, we should be learning. I'm learning too, and here's how I'm doing it. So, and create that feedback culture that actually then also boosts that innovation and so on. So really, role modeling is key, and a lot of research has been done that says, role modeling of like desired new behaviors, which we will talk about, and Jeff was talking about it earlier. Its behaviors are key, and especially so role modeling them by senior leaders is a principal factor in like actually using learning or training effectively, right? And all of this impacts employee engagement and retention in an organization, which is what every organization wants to do. We spend so much on cultivating talent. We need to make sure we provide these opportunities to empower employees, so empower them to make sure that they can learn, develop, grow personally and professionally, and them feel more valued. And that way we can actually retain those talent necessary.
Yeah. I was going to mention something else, but you made a good point there about retention. When they do these studies about the most important reasons why you join a company or stay with a company.
Yeah.
Okay, almost always it's salary, but more and more often you sometimes even think first above salary is the growth opportunities and learning opportunities. If it's not first, it's second. It's right there. So it is very interesting. And talking is better instead of acting, right? Actually building the culture instead of just talking about, we've got this great culture, but then when it comes, push comes to stuff, nothing's there. There's nothing in place. So it is very much a top-down approach for building that culture of continuous learning. Absolutely. So a jam-packed answer there. So thank you very much for sharing that, Bhavna. Okay, Alex, we come over to you now. You mentioned skill building for basketball and football at the beginning. I hope that I could pick up some tips for this next question here about skill building activities. Question here is, what are some practical strategies that organizations can use to stimulate real-world scenarios and immerse their employees in skill building activities that enhance adaptability and problem solving? That was a mouthful, but take it
Thank you. Thank you. 3 points from me on this, and I think the first thing that pops into my head is design. It's so important. Any kind of skill development program or initiative that you give yourself enough time to really scope out and design the context in which these skills will be executed, the situations where your people need to make a decision on whether they execute a skill, such as problem solving, or not. It's about, for me, it's about the tactical element of the skill as well as the technical. It's got to be both. Establishing that context can be time consuming, especially if you're working in a complex organization where you have lots of different audiences doing different roles. So you're going to need some kind of plan or strategy for how you might localize some of that context finding. That's an exercise in itself. What can really make a difference in that part of the process is if you get some input from your clients or key stakeholders on the situations or context in which they feel it's most important to execute a skill well. The second factor for me is narrative. It's the most important thing in terms of immersing your people in skill building activity. It's a natural mechanic that our brains can't fight. When we're given a good story, we get engaged and we get hooked. And you can do this if you're doing digital, remote, or blended, or live delivery. You can create those storylines and have some fun with it, build some energy. Often we focus on the detail when we're creating case studies or scenarios. You need enough detail to make it feel relevant, but what you really need as well is that narrative. Some drama, some emotion, some fleshed out characters that are going to hook people. And again, that's where the fun is. And the third point for me is really about how you balance challenge and support. So you want to make sure that your learners have good scaffolding, good supportive mechanisms. Crucially, there needs to be a good rationale for why they're doing this skill building. And that's where the input from your clients can really make a difference. If your clients or stakeholders are telling you, your organization, your business, that this skill matters, you're more likely to buy into it, especially at leadership level. They need that rationale. If they're going to spend time on skill activity, they need to think, this matters to my client. And then I think group activity is really important in terms of that support. If you want to see different gears in action, it really helps if you can see your peers, your colleagues, see how they problem solve, how they build their adaptability. And then finally, I think it's about some real challenge.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to build adaptability skills, you've got to throw some difficulty at your people. So they need to feel safe enough that they're not going to be exposed, but willing to step into this activity with you and face some real challenge. It's got to be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
That's it for me.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Very straightforward as well, the way you structured that. So thank you for that. Okay, back to you, Jeff. We're going to talk a little bit here about AI-driven tools. Obviously, we touched on generative AI a little bit earlier, but obviously there's plenty of these tools that are becoming available on the market that are there and available for HR and L&D professionals to get their hands on. So the question here is, how do you recommend HR and L&D professionals prepare their teams to embrace AI tools while minimizing resistance to change?
Yeah, that's a big one. And look, I mean, a big part of this is getting people comfortable with the notions and actually showing them, what these tools are, if in fact they haven't already played with them. Or even more fun and more important is finding advocates and champions that live amongst you already in the L&D space, who have just done the ready adoption, just dove straight in, and have them basically share what their narrative was, what their journey was with the experience, and how it's evolved very, very rapidly, to kind of be a super, super powerful co-pilot and sort of an additional tool for them. So I think the first job is you got to have like sort of a change management approach. You got to think about how is it we can wake people up to its existence? How do we get them very quickly beyond sort of heavy technological explanations and to kind of understand, how to actually use this for your advantage. And I think the other thing too is that you have to kind of really foster like open and transparent communication around this stuff, explaining, as always, why are we using AI adoption, and get through some of the kind of obvious fears that people have, especially in training and development. As I'll explain in a minute, there's a lot of people panicked about how AI can just simply replace an L&D professional. And I argue, actually, that should never be the case if you're the right L&D professional to really kind of ride alongside AI. You get yourself out of the scrappy invent from scratch or cut, copy, paste, kind of routines in terms of curriculum development and design. And you get straight into the AI's got that for you. All you have to do is give it the topics in a way that the AI can have some fun with it. And then your job is one of shaping the learner's experience and the gamification components and thinking more broadly about how does this stuff all knit together? How can we create a highly personalized experience for each individual in this organization who is reskilling themselves or upskilling or covering off a particular gap in skill? How do we create these pathways for them? That's the work that potentially you'll be able to do, because there are tools out there. Like I was just talking to a vendor this morning for a client I'm working for, that is a complete build from AI scratch training and development platform. So in other words, it's called ujji.io. And I would encourage you to go check it out. It's brilliant. This young guy, Raphael, came up with a concept. And the bottom line is that you just go into this tool and you say, please build me a training course around this particular thing. And it says, great, do you have some learning content? It's like, yeah, I got Word docs, I got PDF files, I got a whole bunch of stuff that we kind of used in the past, maybe the PowerPoint presentations, whatever. Click here, upload it. The AI figures out what you're talking about, builds an entire curriculum around it, and creates like all these sort of like micro learning bursts within it with quizzes and with highly interactive stuff. Oh, by the way, it can use your face, it can use your voice as and create an avatar that actually goes through and trains people on the different components. All of that can be done. An entire training course can be done in a matter of 30 minutes. So if you can imagine, it probably takes weeks and months sometimes to build some of that stuff out. But that's not what they hired you to do. What they hired you to do is to provide the bigger picture. How do we, as Bhavna was talking about, how do we create a continuous learning and development culture? How to create a place where people are just ravenous about the next new skill? And how do we create this flow, this infinity flow between performance assessment, feedback, skill gap analysis, and then feed that into a learning management system or learning experience system and get that covered off so that this literally becomes an every day and every week and every month and every quarter exercise where you're continuously learning and always ever then feeling like you're growing with the company and you're having more and more impact, not just on your career, but on yourself, which is really big. So that's all. I would say that, look, this is a massive opportunity for learning and development as a profession. You guys can get out of the dirt, right? Out of the ditches of kind of like sorting this stuff out from scratch and really start to blow people's minds at the top of the company and say, you want to become this company? Here's our strategy for getting you there with your existing skill set. And of course, I'd be remiss not to mention tools like DevSkiller are phenomenal in this capacity because they really kind of address this whole, how do we manage our skills ontology? How do we make sure we got the right people in the right place doing the right stuff at the right level? And how do we manage them in a fluid way, kind of like sort of a three-dimensional chess, kind of process with knowledge, with data. That's basically where learning and development comes in. That function becomes the essence, the beating heart of those kinds of movements in terms of shifting our entire population from where they were to where they need to be. So I could go on and on. I'm actually posting in the chat some ChatGPT returns on some of the questions that I'm being asked. And if
I might,
yeah,
let me put it. It might have been I'll put it here for everyone. There we go. That should be there now.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'll just do that. So that there you go. So I could go on and on forever. But look, I think for L&D, this is super, super exciting. This particular period.
Yeah. As you said, getting out of the dirt, and I think two of the most important responsibilities for L&D is not just setting up the structure, but ensuring that the individual is actually learning something from the employee perspective, but then from the leadership perspective, that learning is tied to the business objectives, right? Rather than just getting stuck with doing all this sort of run around work, and instead of really focusing on what's the most important. That's what these tools can provide for sure. I think as well, Jeff, feel free if you want to share the link to this UJJ as well. We can drop that in the chat as well.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much for the response there, Jeff. We should keep moving because we are actually a little bit. Apologize for my baby going in the background. Okay. So I'm launching a second poll on our screen now. This one is about aligning skill development to business, as I just mentioned there at the end. The question here is, what is the biggest challenge your organization faces when aligning skill development initiatives with business goals? Keeping pace with rapidly changing technology, identifying the right skills to prioritize, securing budget and resources for training programs, engaging employees in continuous learning, measuring the effectiveness of upskilling and reskilling efforts, or other. Got so close as well. I do apologize for noise in the background, but that'd be well behaved, but they're not.
I have two teenage boys, and trust me, they're a lot worse behaved than your two dogs are. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah. Well, they show off to one another. That's the problem. So one starts, the other one starts. It's always the way. Alone, they're pretty good, but together they seem to be more mischievous. Anyway,
that's right.
I might be able to take some tips away. See if I can try to get them to learn how to be well behaved when webinars are happening. Anyway, okay, so we are almost done with the voting. I can see there are still quite a few of you who haven't voted, so if you want to cast a vote, drop it in. Thank you. Keep going. Okay, but we better end it because we are already at the half-hour mark. So we're going to end the poll and share the results. So speaking about aligning skill development to business objectives, we have, with 40% of the votes, identifying the right skills to prioritize, 30% keeping pace with rapidly changing technology, 10% for securing budget and resources for training programs, 10% for engaging employees in continuous learning, and 10% for measuring the effectiveness of upskilling and reskilling efforts. So thank you very much for the votes there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Very interesting. We've got a bit of a wider cast of votes here. We are going to focus on one particular point here, shifting gears a little bit towards upskilling and reskilling programs. It's been kind of mentioned throughout the discussion, but I'm going to start with you, Alex, if I can ask this question here for you. So How can leaders ensure that upskilling and reskilling programs are aligned with both business goals and the evolving needs of the digital landscape?
Yeah, it's a good question, especially when things are moving so quickly. I think the first thing that came to my mind was the importance of building that partnership approach with the external training or learning vendors that you might use, and really leaning into that as much as possible. If you've got those trusted partners and you're asking them, what are you seeing? What's working for you? They might not have all the answers straight away, but if the more you're working with them and really truly collaborating with them, they can help you build the solutions you need for your people. So I think that partner approach is really important. And then the second point for me is making sure you have a kind of a testing and iterative approach to any kind of program that you're rolling out. There's many times I've seen learning teams go a bit too quickly and going too wide in rolling out a skills program without having maybe tested it in one team first. Again, things are moving so quickly. It's that much more important to test, have a pilot, get some evaluation, get some metrics. And then when you're sure your approach is going to work and have the impact you're looking for, then go wide.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the response there. Bhavna, do you have anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, I think I'll add on the fact that, of course, along with what Alex has said, just identifying what those gaps are, which is actually more challenging than we think is really, really key as well, right? So do we actually know what our current roles and our future roles really need? Does our business strategy and our forward thinking, do they know what we actually need? So what are the organization strategic plans? How are the emerging technologies and the different industries actually impacting that? Understanding that's really important. And then I will always go back to that approach of having that flexible sort of approaching us, like that learning ecosystem where we are offering this variety of learning, catering to different learning preferences is key. Another thing I will go back to is also the fact that we do need to focus on cultivating behaviors as well. We actually did a study and did a commissioned research at the end of 2022, looking at UK's digital skills gap. And the white paper actually acknowledged the need to invest and prioritize behavioral transformation, right? So whatever technological advancements are around the corner, the report really concluded that 7 behaviors were really key to close that gap. So one was focus on growth and continuous learning, so which is more developing yourself. The others are actually supporting others to learn or developing others. The third is actually being authentic and communicating with empathy. The fourth around influencing and inspiring and displaying those leadership traits around you. And then being able to actually show accountability, commitment to our clients, or actually delighting the customer. And then, of course, teaming. How do you display those teaming, skills? How do you team successfully? And and the last one that's really important is also problem solving, right? So how do you bring that curious and creative mind? So I'd say these are also really, really key for us.
Yeah, as it was captured earlier on in the first poll, that's very interesting. I think another point that I just wanted to add, I was researching for the webinar today, one of which the report was published earlier this year, the LinkedIn Global Workplace Report. The interesting finding about this upskilling and reskilling is that it's to get started. So obviously using the techniques that you and Alex alluded to there, but they have a statistic in here that most upskilling and reskilling programs are lagging of those surveyed. Most are still in the planning and activation stages, with fewer than 5% having advanced far enough to measure success. So not even, maybe some have started, maybe some are in that middle process, but almost all of them aren't even close to the point of being able to measure it. And I think it was Harvard Business Review sums it up. Among companies that have embraced the reskilling challenge, only a handful have done so effectively, and even their efforts have been subscale and of limited impact. So probably missing the critical steps at the beginning. So it's a combination of getting the structure in place, getting started, so you can get to that point where you can really measure impact. So there's a lot of talking about it, but action is what actually will make a change, right? So it's interesting that these statistics, I'll be very curious to see that report. It'll be published early next year to see how that's developed year over year. So it just seems that everything that everybody in the space is talking about at the moment. So thank you very much for the responses there. Alex, I'll bring it back to you if I may, again, talking about universally critical skills we've mentioned at the very beginning. But I wanted to ask you the question: what skills are universally critical? I'm having a trouble asking questions today. What skills are universally critical for employees to thrive across industries during a period of technological advancement?
Yeah, I think for me it comes back to the very basics, the very foundations of those core communication skills. But more specifically, I think it's about contracting for communication within your organization. So what are your agreed formats for communication? What are your communication norms? You know, what are the acronyms, the TLAs, the three-letter acronyms you're going to use, the shorthand? What is your shared language? That contracting activity is often the activity that gets left out. But if you make time for it, it's going to save everyone time down the line. I've been obsessed for the last 12 months with a US TV show called The Bear. And it's set in a kitchen. And for me, it's a lovely example of that kind of contracting and those communication norms. So if a chef is carrying a steaming tureen of soup around, through the kitchen, they shout corner so that the other chefs know that they're coming. It's a very simple idea of a communication norm. But when I've been doing some research into, just as the pandemic struck, into hybrid organizations, remote organizations who already do that kind of remote work well, communication norms always came up as something they do. And I think it's all, as well as contracting for how and when you communicate, it's how you contract for when you won't communicate. So as an organization, clarifying, this is when we're going to be super fast and responsive with each other and our clients. And this is when we slow things down. This is when we're going to have to make sure we have time for ourselves to think, or when we come together to think or be social. So again, going back to my TV show, The Bear, it's a frantic environment in this kitchen, but they always make sure they come together as a team of chefs, and one of them cooks for everyone. And it's that coming together, that social time. And that's agreed, that's contracted for. We've got to see the same type of activity in all our organizations, I think.
Yep. Very interesting points there. And universally understood. The one for me working in bars back in Australia was backs. So if someone had a tray full of glasses, you knew someone was coming behind you, get behind. Just didn't even have to think, you knew it was there. So yeah, good points there. Thank you very much. Okay, so we are moving along quite nice. We've got a few questions left here that we're going to ask. We actually are going to be pushing it for time. But if you have any more questions for our panelists, please feel free to drop them in our Q&A box. We will do our best to get to all of them. You can drop them in there anonymously, or if you would like to drop your name as well, absolutely fine. But we should keep moving, and I'll bring it back to you, Jeff. We're talking about leadership traits here. The question here is, what key leadership traits are required to effectively steer organizations through digital transformation and workforce reskilling initiatives?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, I think you might have said something just earlier, Justin, which really kind of resonated with me, which is I can read off a list of kind of core leadership characteristics that basically would make a digital transformation kind of more thoroughly accepted and engaged with, but they tend to be kind of flowery. They tend to be a bit, kind of highfalutin. They're important. A couple of the real critical ones would be your ability to vision for your people. Everybody understands and remembers the change curve, right? Remember that thing that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did about how it is we kind of encounter and manage grief on Death and Dying, I think was the book. And she talked about this famous curve whereby you first have a shock, and then you have a denial, and then you have anger, and then you slip into the pit of despair where you really just don't know where you are on the thing. And then eventually over time, through help or otherwise, or just pure healing, you start to experiment with new ways of thinking, new ways of being, and getting over your shock and awe. And then hopefully you come out the other side of that experience being, kind of a more fulsome, more connected individual, having been through that painful time. Look, I mean, when you change things at work and to say to somebody, I know you've been doing this like this for 20 years, but we're going to change everything, right? We're just going to turn it on its head. We're going to trust these new fantastic computer models to kind of help us out with these new things. Those models are going to help us completely understand rather opaque and difficult elements that we used to rely on instinct to kind of make real or to kind of affect. And you're just going to have to come along for the ride. You have to help them see over the curve, go from the shock and the denial, potentially even the anger, and go straight over that pit of despair into experiment with a new way of thinking, a new way of being. And a great way of doing that is by thrusting people into it and sitting them amongst champions and people who love doing this sort of thing. And actually experimenting with it. Start with fun, whimsical, silly things to go solve for, and to be amazed by the power of the tools in terms of what it is they can do, and then start to give them exercises to say, actually now I need you to create some real data. I really need you to kind of dive deep. How would you solve for this problem? And then ask the computer to come back with some really interesting insights in terms of it. How would you structure that prompt? And by the way, that stuff's not hard. There's some simple formula to how you structure a good prompt. And the bottom line is have people experiment with it. And once they start to get into the rhythm of getting some real answers, then give them some real assignments. Start really kind of using a data-driven decision-making model with them and saying, hey, this is the kind of stuff I need from you. Please go figure out how to kind of deliver to that, and throw them into the deep end a little bit. But the idea is you always need to be modeling a sense of vision, a sense of agility, a sense of willingness to do it yourself, show people that you can do it, and then this ability to kind of listen to people's fears and uncertainty and doubt as they're going through this, but very quickly move them on to the next phase at speed. So resilience and persistence, kind of matters in that frame too. But anyway, I could go on and on and on. And again, I shared some notes on that in the chat, Justin. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. It's very interesting because I think one of the mistakes that leaders make is probably thinking ahead about the benefit it's going to make for the organization or for themselves, rather than connecting and closing that gap between like, okay, this is going to help me get here, but how do we communicate that to my people?
And expecting everybody just to jump on the
just to jump on board just because it's the right thing to do. It doesn't mean
right. So
it's not the way it works, unfortunately. But we're not robots. I mean,
True.
Not yet, but I'm only joking. But no, very interesting points. Okay, I do see some questions coming in the Q&A, so that's great. So we're going to keep moving along. We've got a few questions here. The first one here is about personalized learning experiences, which you've actually touched on a little bit with the continuous learning question earlier, Bhavna. But to elaborate on that, how can organizations use digital tools and automation to create personalized learning experiences for their employees?
Yeah. I think I'll actually just go back to what Jeff just touched upon is first, actually, are we being that data-driven? Are we taking those data-driven decisions, right? Do we know what's worked, what we need, what even in terms of like how do our learners learn best? It's actually making sure we provide them with those options, right? And then we also spoke about, I think Alex was talking about and Jeff were talking about learning platforms and, learning providers. They can't be overlooked either. So a lot of them have those AI integrations now, which actually make it faster and easier to align that skill development with the right resources and in the right way. Even learning partners like LinkedIn Learning, Udemy, they've started to use AI and it's really helped us, and it's helped L&D teams as well, and some LXPs, LMSs also have them integrated now, and then we as L&D teams, are we really leveraging it to the best? Are we leveraging AI to the best? Think about how we really utilize it to our advantage, even taking into consideration how it can help us with thinking about accessibility, diversity of needs, those things that we sometimes find it more difficult and it takes us a long time to design something. That AI can really help us in terms of creating or curating content for our learners. Then, of course, the collaborative, tools, spaces where people can have the discussions is really key. gamification, I think like Alex was talking about, like, that experiential learning as well is still really, really key. It has a lot of success because you are learning by doing. And then gamification really plays on our human need for wanting to be ahead with like those leaderboards and achieving things. So, use that to our advantage, right? Time is like a really big constraint in most organizations, is that time and effort when it comes to learning. So how do we incorporate those micro learning opportunities and like those bite-sized content? What we started to do recently is actually look at like 10-minute, really short 10-minute live sessions, because where you can take away like really one key thing that you learn in 10 minutes, right? We call it 10 at 10s. And then also like nano nuggets, where you do like a 2-minute video by like a subject matter expert that's there in that repository when you need a specific a need comes up as well. So we really need to make sure that we're empowering people, to take that ownership by pulling them into this engaging content and not really like pushing, mandatory learning and like learning onto them. I think that's key for us.
Very interesting as always. And what was it? 10 for a 10?
10 at 10s, yeah, because it happens
10
at
at
10 in
10s.
the morning and for
10
10
at 10. Is every day, or how does it work?
No, it's not every day, but we do make sure we've got a couple of them every month, and so and that's like the most number of participants we have. So it's been great.
Yeah.
Don't steal the name.
Don't steal the name, just the idea. You can
Steal the idea.
The idea. Exactly. Yeah. Well, we do the same thing. I mean, even with webinars, we have sort of so much information back to this, but it's very difficult for people to join for an hour during the day. And probably for the past year, we've been clipping some of the responses. So maybe that response right there, you might see in a clip on our LinkedIn, which is digestible and quick if someone's on the tram to work or whatever it is. So it's very interesting. Definitely the whole micro learning experience as well. Unfortunately, because of our attention spans that are dramatically shortening, right? So anyway, it's very good. All right, so final two questions here. I'll start with you, Alex, for this first one, and then and Barb, I'll bring it back to you again. But challenges in regards to future-proofing your career, talking about future skills in the digital age. So the question here, Alex, I'll start with you. What are some of the biggest challenges organizations face when trying to future-proof their careers, and how can they overcome these obstacles?
The one area I've been thinking a lot about lately is around these principles and ideas of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Because to the generations coming into the workplace now, it matters more and more. So I think as organizations, we need to find out how can we ensure that there's not just an EDI team who are kind of part of, say, HR or people and culture, but it's that activity is kind of boxed to what they're doing. We need to get away from that and make sure that these ideas and principles are foundational elements to the way we do work and the way we do business. Inclusion is a great one. We know that there's a link between inclusivity and innovation and impact. So the business case is there. So I think it's we need to make this foundational. And the second one, I think, is something that Bhavna alluded to. It's about time. It's an old one, but a good one. How do we help our leaders, our people unlock time? In many economies, we're facing some challenging times. We can't throw money at problems, so we've got to help our leaders and our teams unlock time. And actually, as Jeff was saying, some of these AI tools, as L&D professionals, they're going to help us do that. So we should have more time to be strategic, to be curious, to have time to really do our research and find out what our organizations really need. That's my perspective.
Yeah. Your first point there reminded me of a statistic. I'm not sure if this is the correct one, but US Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that Gen Z will make up about 30% of the US workforce by 2030. So it's in almost five short years, you've got this completely shifting dynamic of the workforce and different expectations and everything like that. So it's very interesting to your first point there. Bhavna, what's your opinion on this one?
I think to add on to what Alex said, and I love that Alex, you covered the DEI element. That's so important to look at, even with like the different ages in the workforce. That's like really key to make sure we're inclusive. The other thing that I often sometimes find missing is like the lack of that strategic vision in the organization. They themselves don't know what's actually needed to sort of future-proof the workforce in terms of like there's a gap in themselves. So actually the organization's working towards finding out how they want to operate like 5 years, 10 years down the line, and then looking at that gap is really key. The other thing I find is also people being more resistant to change, but we could, some people are still resistant and they lack that motivation sometimes to acquire those new skills, but we can change that. I think role modeling there is key, and also communicating the value proposition really early on. It can actually help them remove that resistance, right? So they need to be able to understand why it's beneficial, why should they be moving, how it's really helpful to their personal growth as well, not just that organization growth. I think we really need to do that. You spoke about like cost, time commitment. We already know that's a constraint. But again, utilizing all of these AI tools, the different platforms and so on can really help there. And something we shouldn't forget, and we've spoken about before, is also like to measure and track progress and actually keep sharing how we are operating, right? So regularly evaluating the effectiveness of what we do, the different initiatives we take, collecting those data, those learning outcomes, and how it actually changes people's performance, because that will like also be a really motivating and engaging factor, along with its impact on like business objective, is really important for us as L&D to sort of influence employees.
Yep. Very interesting. Jeff, did you have anything you wanted to add on here at the end before we move forward?
No, to be honest with you, I'm just conscious of time, and I talk too much already, so don't encourage me.
Okay, no worries. All right, so I'll stick with you, Jeff, for our final question, and we do have a Q&A question in there, so we'll get to that one at the very end. But if you have any more, please fire them in there. But we're looking ahead. We're talking about outlook here. Looking ahead, what do you foresee as the most critical skills that organizations will need to prioritize in the next 5 years, and how should they start preparing, more importantly, now?
Well, look, beyond sort of the core technical challenges and everything else, I think the stuff that sort of sits above and beyond that we all have to start kind of like raising ourselves up to the same level quite quickly would be things like something I would call like digital fluency. Start to get familiar with the jargon. Dive into YouTube videos, have fun with this stuff on the weekend. I also included, Justin, in the chat, a link to a YouTube channel called AI Revolution X, I think. And it's brilliantly done. And it's awesome. You can consume a video a day, 3 minutes, and you walk away feeling like you know everything there is to know about AI. That's the kind of stuff you just kind of want to dive into and just get comfy with. It's not scary stuff. Emotional intelligence, always. Of course, don't give up on that. That is basically our key differentiator in life, is our ability to think at the speed, or maybe even beyond AI, in terms of how it is we can be super, super effective in terms of the way we talk and deal with each other. Adaptability, always, right? Things are only going to get weirder faster than we could possibly imagine. Train your brain to calm down and just absorb what's necessary, and always ever be learning, and just embrace what's happening. It's a wonderful time to be alive. It might feel a bit scary, but don't run away from it. That in critical thinking and collaborative problem solving, as always, right? I mean, that stuff has always ever been valued in tech and engineering firms that I've worked in. But we all need to kind of embrace it now, because the problems that we're going to have to solve for are far more complicated than they ever used to be, and have multiple different perspectives. A perfect breeding ground for the use of AI. And so if you can basically learn how to kind of pull apart a complex scenario into its component parts and start to think through it logically, and use tools like AI to help you with that process, you will always ever be sort of at the top of your class in terms of what the world needs. So that would be my advice, Justin.
Thank you very much. Alex, do you want to add anything on top of that yourself?
Just very briefly, just to, very much in tune with what Jeff was saying around those human plus AI skills.
Mhm.
I think for me, it's about co-creation and co-coaching with AI. I really enjoy working with ChatGPT. I'm giving it more data, and I'm kind of coaching the tool on what I need, what I know, what I understand, what I'm looking for, etc. But I often find that it's coaching me as well. When I'm doing coaching with live people, one of the most important tools I have is my ability to listen and summarize. And it's a simple tool, but it's so effective in helping people move their thinking on.
Yeah.
And ChatGPT can do that for me. So it's kind of like co-coaching. You're coaching each other, and you can get to that point where you're co-creating. And I think
And
that
it doesn't judge you. That's the other
no,
thing too, right?
no, it's lovely. And I think the kind of corollary to that is knowing when to lean into and harness the kind of hallucinations we get from AI, and when to be wary of them, and
Yeah.
understanding in our processes when we need both.
Yeah, well put. Yeah, like co-coaching. We haven't had that before. It's a very very nice analogy. So thank you for that. As I mentioned, we do have one question here in the Q&A. Let me just answer this live. I'll fire this out to any one of the panelists who want to jump on board to this. So feel free. But the question here is, how do I ensure that the technologies I implement now can adapt to future business growth? Not sure. Does anyone want to have a stab at this one? I'm not sure. Jeff or Alex, you both unmuted. Who wants to have a go?
Just my quick 2 cents on it. Look, you're not going to be sure. There's one thing that is sure, which is AI is going to change everything so fast on a week by week basis. It's that level of change that the software tools that are built with it in its core basically are going to be modified in pretty radical ways as well. And so what I would always ever say is make sure the tool that you're using is solving for the stuff that you find most critical to you. So in other words, make sure it's the right tool for the right job, right? That's the old adage that your grandpa always used to tell you, it's a right tool for the right job. This is, kind of thing. But that's really, it makes sense, because if you're trying, for instance, take DevSkiller, you're trying to solve for understanding the entire talent inventory of your organization in terms of what skills, levels of proficiency, and capability your people have on a global basis, so that you can then start to make commercial decisions about what new product are we going to build, what are we going to sunset, how do we do this without restructuring the whole organization and firing a bunch of people and then rehiring a bunch of people. How do we do these things? If your tools aren't helping you do those things, or they're doing one or two of those aspects quite well, but then the rest of it just falls off a cliff, wrong tool. Keep looking, keep spend time asking people about what the latest, coolest, greatest thing is, and get lots of different perspectives on it. Get as many all-in-one tools as you possibly can, where the capability is amazing in all of those aspects, as opposed to a core tool that has 3 things that is brilliant about it, but 5 add-on things that they were sort of an afterthought. That would be my quick answer to that.
Yeah. I was I could have taken the question myself, thinking about it. It's my job in marketing to communicate what tools like ours, being a tool provider. But I think a very good point that you mentioned is talking with your colleagues and peers in your space to find out what's out there. I mean, everybody does this. I do this with people that I'm working with in my company, outside of my company. So it's one very good point. But also, I'm not sure the best way to explain how to do this, but keeping an eye on what the company's doing. So obviously, tune into the customer newsletters, the announcements, these sorts of things. If these things are resonating with you, then they're probably on the right track for providing what you need. And obviously that's going to be a fluid thing that's changing all of the time. So I think that's really important as well. So pay close attention to those things as well. But I wanted to wrap it up here, because we did well. We got in time. So very, very good work, everybody. So first of all, I would like to thank all of you for joining for today's webinar and the other 2 parts of our webinar series, NextGen Workforce Series. Thank you if you've joined all 3, or if you've joined a couple, if you've just joined today, I really appreciate it. They are all on YouTube. They're also all on our website. It's a ungated link. You just go to the landing page, YouTube links that right there on the landing page. It's also on our YouTube channel. I also wanted to take a very big thanks to our panelists. So Alex, Bhavna, and Jeff, thank you very much for your insights shared today. I think it was a really interesting discussion. We packed a lot of information in there. I learned a lot myself, so I'm really appreciative for listening to your guys' responses today. So that's about it for today. Thank you very much. We do have a couple of webinars for the rest of the year coming in November and December, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. And as I said, that recording will be coming tomorrow, so also keep it on your inbox for the recording. But anyway, thank you, everybody, and hope to see you all next time.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you,
Take care,
Justin.
everybody.
Take care.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.